Welcome to this explainer of The Huntsman by the modern English poet Edward Lowbury. Today we're going to unpack the wildly suspenseful, Gothic African folklore that drives this incredibly captivating ballad. We're looking closely at a poem that is just a brilliant display of imaginative richness, supernatural mystery, and, as you'll see, some really profound psychological insight. So, let's just dive right into this gripping tale with a literal life-or-death question. It's the dark moral engine of today's story. Can talking to the wrong person actually cost you your life? I want you to keep that question right in the back of your mind as we explore how a simple, seemingly harmless failure to keep a secret led to an absolute tragedy. Section 1. The African Folklore Setup. Our story begins deep out in the wild bush and forest with our protagonist. He's a famous tribal hunter named Kagwa, who has incredible physical capability but, well, a pretty tragic flaw. He talks way too much. Now, our source material categorizes this poem as a ballad, and basically that means it relies on simple, day-to-day language to weave a really fast-moving narrative, one that is just hurtling toward a tragic conclusion. That straightforward language actually reflects the simple lifestyle of the tribal people, so we can easily grasp the events as they unfold, even while this dark undercurrent is constantly pulling us toward the inevitable.
Section 2. Discovering the Talking Skull. The plot really kicks into gear one day in the forest when Kagwa encounters something deeply unnatural and, for some reason, attempts to strike up a conversation with it.
What's really interesting here is how the poem establishes its early symbols. You have Kagwa hunting the lion, right? Which obviously establishes his immense bravery. But that contrasts so sharply with his discovery of the skull, representing death. You'd normally expect a seasoned hunter to take a skull incredibly seriously, but instead, Kagwa's attempt to chat with it paints this unexpectedly humorous, almost careless picture of him.
And then, the tension just spikes. The analysis notes this sudden use of personification and kinesthetic imagery when the skull actually opens its mouth to speak. It injects this intense, Gothic, supernatural element right into the middle of an otherwise realistic hunt. Giving a piece of bone the ability to move its jaw and talk, it's deeply unsettling, and it immediately elevates this from a simple hunting trip into a full-blown suspense thriller.
And the skull delivers this absolutely chilling line, a golden word of warning laced with some really dark humor. Talking brought me here. It's literally telling Kagwa that failing to keep his mouth shut is what led to its demise. But the impulsive Kagwa, he completely misses the depth of this suspenseful warning.
Section 3. The King's Deadly Ultimatum. Instead of actually pondering this supernatural warning, Kagwa rushes straight from the forest to the monarch's chair. He's probably expecting praise or reward for his wild Gothic tale, and this brilliantly illustrates the literary device of antithesis. Think about the severe contrast here. You have Kagwa rushing in, totally hasty and impulsive, seeking glory. Meanwhile, the king sits there in slow, deeply serious silence. The king is processing the story deliberately, thinking deeply about what this bizarre tale actually means.
To emphasize this, the poem uses a technique called inversion in the king's dialogue. By altering the normal word order, the poet literally forces us to slow down. It mimics the terrifying, calculated pacing of a monarch who is deciding a man's fate. The king perceives the story as either a terrible insult or a threat to his throne, and he is definitely not amused.
So, the king issues a terrifying ultimatum. He reveals his wrath and instantly turns Kagwa's impulsive gossip into a fatal trap. He says, "Okay, if the tale is a lie and the skull speaks no word, Kagwa himself must die." By failing to think before he acted, Kagwa has just put his own life firmly on the line.
Section 4. The Forest of Suspense. Let's see how this builds tension as Kagwa and the king's guards ride out to verify this unbelievable story.
You can trace the plot progression right here. Kagwa's initial failure to think leads to this desperate search. They're scouring the forest for days and nights until they finally find the skull. But this time, the skull is stubbornly silent.
So, gosh, what's going to happen to Kagwa now? As he pathetically begs the silent skull to speak, this agonizing silence forces us, the readers, into peak suspense. We demand to know his ultimate fate, right? Because he knows exactly what awaits him if he can't prove his story to these guards. The silence of that skull is just deafening.
Which brings us to Section 5, the fatal final twist. The climax arrives, and the stubborn silence of the skull finally seals Kagwa's doom. The tragic irony of this climax is absolutely devastating. The guards strike Kagwa down with sword and spear. And then, only after Kagwa is dead, the supernatural skull finally breaks its silence. It actually waited. It let him die, and then it opens its mouth to ask the dead huntsman how he got there.
And in this wild burst of dark humor, Kagwa's corpse provides the exact same answer the skull gave him at the very beginning of the story. Talking brought me here. He finally realizes the truth of that initial warning when it is way, way too late, doomed by his own inability to keep quiet.
So, what are we supposed to take away from all this? Well, the deep-end analysis extracts some really powerful moral lessons from Kagwa's predicament. It's a massive warning against the ill effects of impulsive communication. You have to understand the absolute weight of your words and be deeply mindful of who you are speaking to. A king is not someone to just entertain with wild stories. Never share unconfirmed or Gothic information impulsively, and maybe consult your intellectual peers before spreading stories that are just beyond your grasp.
It all comes down to thinking deeply about the weight of your own words before you speak. In our modern world of instant communication and, let's be honest, unconfirmed information flying everywhere, are you absolutely certain your talking won't lead to a tragic end? I really hope this explainer has given you a fantastic roadmap to understanding the brilliant warnings hidden in the Huntsman, and that it inspires you to look a little closer at the hidden depths of everyday literature. Thanks for joining me.